Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Kurt and I am a podcaster on the We Made This Podcast network. I am also known as R Muldrake. You can find me on Twitter. That's RMULDRAKE. This week is my continuing coverage of Westworld Season 4. In particular, this week, Episode 4, which is called Generation Loss. As ever, this is my first reaction after watching it just the once, often before I go to work or when I get back home from work. And another interesting installment for me. I think it's probably one of the weaker episodes overall, but it does start to provide us with some answers. Now, last week, what became apparent after my recording as I thought about it, and I've spoken to a couple of people about this, is that I'm a huge X-Files fan. And it became apparent that the Fly storyline is very similar to the Fight the Future movie and some of the mythology in the X-Files, with regards to flies, black goo, and a delivery system, a virus, and control. So I thought that thinking about the if X-Files were to be made and rebooted today, then the Westworld story in this meld might have been something to bear in mind. So I just found that really intriguing after the recording last week. In itself, the control that Hale has over the world after this 23 to 30 year gap following the events of season 3. Not sure how I feel about that just yet. It's an interesting way to go about it. The fact that the idea that they are controlling us rather than us controlling them, I find that is intriguing, and I'm not sure if I'm fully comfortable with it. I also like the elements that they are taking from COVID-19 and instilling that in a different way and instilling fears that we may well all have since the pandemic of the last 2 or 3 years. So by utilizing that, I think worked really well. And the fear of the fly stuff, I maybe would have liked to have seen a little bit more of that, maybe go down a little more of a horror trope, but this is very much a sci-fi show and it does play with narrative, and I think this is part of the appeal of Westworld, that there's always going to be this narrative time slippage. And this week it quickly became apparent when we saw Z, aka Frankie, at one moment in time where just before the reveal, when I started to have my I started to have my doubts as to which timeline we're looking at or what time we're looking at. I still have questions over the Christina thing, if that is this new time frame and Christina is there with Teddy, and Christina's friend had that nightmare, and that would have allusions to the fact that she was a child when she was infected, and children are more likely to take on the control as a growing child, actually, go understand through learning. And it took a while, it took a generation effectively for the world to start to take that control over, especially given that the adults are less likely to have that control. And I used to, actually, strangely enough, study A-level English language, and it was like baby development and language development and things. So that in itself was good. I thought that utilizing that, having the idea that it was a generational thing, that it's taken a generation to do that, was good. Bringing in Caleb's story and referring that back to Delos, I think it was season 2 Delos, when we saw William with Delos and the multiple iterations of him. Then the fact that this is Caleb's 278, so they are still working towards that human being immortalized. And what I liked about this episode at the beginning, when we saw Maeve and Caleb actually on the battlefield when they were attacking Rehoboam, is the conversations that they had together. I thought having Maeve talk about her potential immortality and the mortality of Caleb, and the living the moments and cherishing those moments, and the fact that I'd say that, and living vicariously through the daughters of both of them was it's good. I like the theme. I like what they do. I like what they're doing with that. I think the reflection of both Maeve and Caleb in that way has worked through the season, and we saw that on the very first episode with Maeve, and just the very nature that she's the one that was looking in on Caleb, but actually affected the attack from William was good as well. So the narrative is going all over the place a little bit, and we still have Bernard, who has spent God knows how many tens of thousands of years over the 23 to 30 year period. Because I think you've got to, with the 23 years, I would assume that you've got to include the 7 years as well. So you're looking at maybe 30 years that he's had, and I can't remember the equation, but the equation was quite significant when he went into the Sublime. So he's had a lot of time to go through those moments, and looking at the extension of the park, the 1920s park was good, especially for Z's or Frankie's challenge to find Caleb. I would assume that Caleb would have been taken well before that, because obviously he's been changed to a host form and is actually doing the whole Delos thing. So that gives Frankie some agency to actually continue on her struggle. And these are obviously a bit like the Rebel Alliance, the people that Hale has been after. We saw in I think it was the previous episode where Bernard had killed the two hosts, which were obviously after this Rebel Alliance. So a lot of it all comes down to that, and it wouldn't be surprising if it's Frankie becomes the leader of the rebels, and then we'll see how that portrays and is played out. The tower, I'm disappointed to say that I actually didn't think about the tower until it was too late. With all the nodes that we had last week, the big node that we had last week, and the nodes that we saw throughout the park, it was unfortunate that I didn't see that coming. And, it was one of those moments where it was a couple of seconds before, and I was like, oh, right, okay, I know where that's going. And the only other thing I think from my first reaction today is the Christina Teddy thing. I wrote a couple of notes down when I did this, so I'm just going to quick look and see what I actually wrote. Yeah, the Christina and Teddy date, I thought was marvelously played. There's so much subtext within their conversation. If we look at the previous date that people had, that Christina had, and her inability to express how she feels or how she wants to be portrayed, you've got Teddy talking about writing, you've got all these things that allude to stuff that's happened before, and the subtext was absolutely wonderfully done. And the very things, even things like the lipstick being dropped on the floor and Teddy picking it up, and the allusions to that would be, well, but there's that part of the program, as Christine remembered that and has written a storyline for that, which doesn't seem to be the case. But we do have question marks over Christina and who exactly is she. Is there another narrative trick being played on us at that point? It's highly likely, but it does seem that they've tried to match the time zones with Christina, and who exactly is she is to be seen. But I did think that the Teddy element works really well, and as I say, the subtext, the dialogue that they had, the subtleness that they played that together, even though like musical cues worked really well. And I think I've said before that Christine's storyline is actually the one that I'm most intrigued by. And for me, the fact that Christine's loop was broken on this episode gives us that theme, that understanding that something is wrong with the world, or she's breaking that loop. And I think that, well, obviously Westworld has that to give within itself that it will often talk about the narrative loops and snaking its own tail, that kind of thing. So I thought by breaking that loop and having her sleep in, having her draw the tower, all those things worked really well. So again, another effective, good episode of Westworld. Probably one of the weaker ones so far, but reveals are often like that. And halfway through the season, so really looking forward to seeing what happens next. And thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.